Mark Novinsky with Coon Rapids is next up. And he'll start out by sharing some community updates from Coon Rapids.
Well, thank you and good morning. I'm Mark Novinsky, the Community Development Director at Coon Rapids. Our site is located behind the Riverdale shopping area, which some of you may be familiar with. The site is about 15 acres, and it's owned by the Rail Authority. It's currently undeveloped, and as I mentioned, it sits behind several million square feet of retail, and it's sort of hidden from a lot of view. But we do have the tower overpass to get from one platform to another, so that does give it a little bit more of an identity from some of our main roads. The problem, though, however, is that does impact the opportunity to do commercial or office-oriented development. So the consensus seems to be that residential uses are going to be most likely on that site, and that certainly was not a surprise to us to hear that. In 2007, the city did establish some development guidelines, trying to look at the site, trying to understand what were the challenges, what were the opportunities associated with the site, and there were a number of guidelines that came out of that. But one of the key ideas is that we need to look beyond the 15-acre site as we're thinking about transit-oriented development. So some of those questions are going to be: how do we relate to the neighborhoods that are around the site? How do we handle the big box that's immediately north of the site, and what opportunities might present themselves as redevelopment occurs there? And how do we otherwise connect to the site, because the main access, really the only access at this point, is off of Northdale Boulevard, which is a main road but not necessarily a primary road. At this time, the council has decided not to pursue a southerly connection through a neighborhood which is adjacent to but cannot get directly to the station site. Not necessarily an easy fix, and certainly there's some dollars involved and impacts to properties. So our council has just said at this point we're not going to pursue that. Maybe something that we look at in the future. And this fall we're looking at a park referendum to improve a number of our parks throughout our communities and our community, and make some trail connections. We've got a lot of stops and starts. We need to fill some gaps in our sidewalks and trails. This would help, and we're also considering, as part of our budget plan, increasing the amount that we do dedicate to our park expenditures on an annual basis to also support those connections.
Thanks, Mark. And Jim McComb will give us some market highlights.
Thank you, Jenna. Coon Rapids has the largest number of residents that are employed in, or the draw area has the largest number of residents employed in Minneapolis, about 8,800. 1.9% of those ride the train into Target Station. In terms of the demographic characteristics, employment is increasing, population is stable, and households have been increasing over the past 11 years. The average household income, $72,800, falls in the mid-range of the Northstar communities, and the householders over 65 years of age, 16.7%, which is the third highest of the Northstar communities. Owner-occupied units are basically stable. The renter-occupied units are increasing, again, the foreclosure issue. And the percent of the housing stock that is renter-occupied has increased from 19.6% in 2000 to 22.8% in 2010. The average, when I spoke before on Fridley, their average building permits per year were 40 and 23 in the latter period. For Coon Rapids, the average during the period 2000 to 2007 was 206, which was relatively high in the corridor. dropped to an average of 11 in the latter 4-year period. There's been a tremendous change in housing development. Looking to the future, we anticipate the station area can accommodate 56 to 64 additional housing units per year over the next 5 years, with roughly the same amount in the next 10-year period on an annual basis.
Thank you, Jim McComb, and it's on to Jim Prost to share with us some information about the strategies that could be helpful.
Coon Rapids is interesting in that the Regional Rail Authority owns the land around the station, and that does create a wonderful opportunity for a demonstration project or for a public-private partnership or for some land write-down or creative use of that parcel for development. It's interesting when you look at some of the numbers in terms of the income, that 80% of the median income in Coon Rapids, and you take 20% of that for rent, and that happened to be where Jim McComb came up on the rental. And interesting enough, if it was 30% of the income, that happened to be where Jim Prost came in terms of the required rentals. So there really is kind of an opportunity. If you look at the demographics and you can market this and take advantage of the transit rental areas, that this really is an opportunity. It also says that it's an opportunity to potentially reclassify the assessment tax rate, because even at our high goal in terms of what would need to be achieve a viable project, it still would meet the requirements related to the regional affordability. So affordability is in the eyes of the beholder, and this would at $1,900 a month meet that. So that's an opportunity. The city has in the past looked at financial enhancements, but it's very much individual deal oriented. So what that project was, how it was effectuated, what the quality of that project is a very important issue, as is zoning and regulatory modifications. So I think it's very important to kind of start a process with the council to start to understand some of these development impacts, these development policies, and translate both the market implications and the financial implications, so they can establish policy and use the available tools to get the type of project they may desire.
Thank you, Jim. Joni, some comments about connectivity?
Certainly. And Coon Rapids, the real focus of this study area is really trying to improve trail connections to the station area. And in particular, there are some gaps along Round Lake Boulevard over here on the west side that really should be filled in the future, both north of Main Street and south. The city right now is proposing some sidewalks on the both sides of Northdale Boulevard, and we would suggest that they consider changing one side of that roadway to include a trail versus sidewalk, so that you would then have trail connections coming down on the east side and on the west side of the station area to once again to help bring those bikers in. And then on top of it, possibly a trail connection going right through, once again, following that north side of that rail corridor, so that bicyclists can make an easy access into the station area. And while the council is not interested at this time of making that connection through the neighborhood, I would hope that they would still keep it on the long-term radar, that, you know, if there is that possibility in the future to make that trail connection for this neighborhood to try to get across the rail to that station, it really would make improvements for that neighborhood, ease of access for that neighborhood to get to the station. In terms of sidewalk connections, once again, very long-term vision goals here in terms of sidewalk connections. As Mark had mentioned, as this retail area, when it redevelops sometime in the long-term future, for the city to consider if there is a way to kind of punch through that building to provide some sort of a pedestrian access down to that station area and through that redevelopment area. and as well of possibly doing another one towards the west end of that mall structure as well. Then lastly, when the bridge at Round Lake Boulevard ever gets reconstructed, or it will eventually, to include a sidewalk facility on that bridge when it gets reconstructed, and potentially even then create a connection down and around and underneath that bridge that then could connect up with a future trail along the rail corridor, once again trying to improve access for pedestrians to the station area.
Thanks, Joni. And Mark, would you do a little wrap for us on your implementation strategies?
Certainly. Well, our implementation strategy is fairly straightforward. First, I think we're going to take some time to review the study with our various policymakers. We certainly want to have discussions with Anoka County or with the Anoka County Rail Authority about the site and where the opportunities for the city and the rail authority to partner might lie. And we anticipate that there may be others who are interested in those discussions as well, both from the public and private sectors. Then I think we'll have to spend a fair amount of time with our policymakers trying to set forward some local strategies. We certainly want to see the site develop, but we certainly want to see it develop in a way that meets city goals and objectives. So planning and preparing for development, trying to understand what the city's interests and tolerance levels are in those preparations, determining the financial tools and the city's capacity to provide some of those financial tools, and then also figure out how best to market the site. So I guess in closing, I would just echo Scott's comments about our desire to certainly collaborate with our partners along the corridor and certainly maximize, try to leverage the opportunities that the corridor provides the North Metro area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.